I'm sitting at the head of my own dining table in the house I built with 30 years of 70-hour work weeks, watching my daughter-in-law Kelsey stare at me with pure contempt while her mother Lorraine smirks beside her. The risotto I spent 2 hours preparing sits perfectly plated in front of each of us, steam still rising from the saffron-infused rice I made from scratch because Elliot mentioned last week that Kelsey loved Italian food. I'm trying, God knows I'm trying, to keep this family together, even though I feel my only son slipping further away from me every single Sunday we do this. The conversation has been tense all evening, little barbs disguised as jokes, passive-aggressive comments about my fancy house and extravagant lifestyle. I've smiled through it all, passed the wine, asked about their week, pretended not to notice Lorraine rolling her eyes every time I speak. This is what the past 2 years have looked like since Elliot married Kelsey. Every week, I host them in my home in Greenwich, and every week, I'm treated like an unwelcome guest in my own dining room. Then it happens. Kelsey pushes back her chair with a scrape that makes me wince. She stands up, and for a moment, I think she's going to excuse herself to the restroom. Instead, she walks around the table toward me. There's something in her expression I've never seen before, something that makes my stomach tighten with a feeling I can't quite name. She stops right beside my chair, close enough that I can smell her perfume, that cloying vanilla scent she always wears too heavily. She leans over my plate. I think she's going to say something quietly, maybe another one of her cutting remarks about how I'm trying too hard or showing off. But instead, she does something I never could have anticipated in 1,000 years. She spits directly into my risotto. The sound of it is obscene in the quiet dining room. A thick, deliberate glob of saliva landing in the center of my carefully prepared meal, spreading across the golden rice like poison. I stare at it, unable to process what just happened, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes are seeing. "That's what you deserve, Adrian," Kelsey says, her voice dripping with venom. She doesn't whisper it. She says it loud enough for everyone to hear, proud of what she's just done. Lorraine actually laughs, a genuine, delighted laugh, like her daughter just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. "About damn time someone put you in your place," she adds, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. My heart is pounding so hard I can feel it in my throat. 30 years of building a consulting empire, of negotiating with CEOs and closing multi-million-dollar deals, of holding my composure through my husband's sudden death and single-handedly raising a son while running a company, and nothing has ever made me feel as small as this moment. I'm 57 years old, sitting in my own home, staring at saliva in my food while 2 women laugh at my humiliation. But I don't react. Not yet. Years of high-stakes business taught me that the person who reacts first loses. The person who lets emotion dictate their response hands power to their opponent. So I sit very still, my hands folded in my lap beneath the table where no one can see them trembling. And I wait. I turn to look at my son. Elliot has gone pale, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He's staring at his wife with an expression I can't quite read. Shock, maybe. Or is it fear? For one brief, desperate moment, I think he's going to stand up for me. I think he's going to finally, after 2 years of asking me to understand her side and give her time to adjust and not take things personally, set a boundary with his wife. Instead, he leans toward me. His voice is barely above a whisper, urgent and pleading. "Mom, please, just behave. Don't do anything. Please don't make a scene." Those words hit me harder than the spit in my plate. Don't make a scene. As if I'm the one who's been behaving badly. As if I'm the one who just committed an act of such profound disrespect that I'm still struggling to comprehend it. My son, the boy I carried for 9 months, the child I raised alone after his father died when he was only 14, the young man I put through architecture school and supported through every dream and setback, is asking me to behave. Something crystallizes inside me in that moment. Something that's been building for months, maybe years, suddenly snaps into perfect clarity. I've been trying to buy peace with my silence. I've been swallowing insults and humiliations, telling myself it's temporary, that Kelsey will eventually warm up to me, that my son will eventually see what's happening. I've been so terrified of losing my only child, my only family after Richard died, that I've accepted being treated as less than human in my own home. But there are limits. Even love has limits. I stand up slowly, with the same controlled grace I used to employ when walking into hostile boardrooms. My legs feel surprisingly steady. I reach for my phone on the sideboard behind me, unlock it with fingers that have stopped shaking, and pull up the message thread I created 4 months ago. The one labeled simply DF. I press the call button, and Douglas Fitzgerald answers on the first ring, exactly as we planned. Mrs. Kingsley, his familiar voice says through the speaker. Professional, calm, ready. I don't take my eyes off Kelsey as I speak. My voice comes out steady, almost eerily calm. Execute the plan. The confusion on Kelsey's face is almost worth the months of humiliation I've endured to get to this moment. Almost. Lorraine's smirk falters. Elliot looks like he's about to be sick. Immediately, Douglas responds. We're in position. 2 minutes. I end the call and set my phone down on the table with a soft click. The silence in the dining room is absolute. Even the sound of traffic from the street outside seems to have vanished. It's just the 4 of us, frozen in this moment, and I can see the exact instant when it occurs to them that maybe, just maybe, they've miscalculated. What plan? Kelsey's voice has lost some of its confidence. What are you talking about? I don't answer. I simply fold my hands in front of me and wait. 60 seconds. That's how long Douglas said it would take from the call. 60 seconds for him and my assistant Jennifer to walk from the car parked at the curb to my front door. Elliot stands up, his chair scraping back. Mom, what's going on? What plan? Sit down, Elliot, I say quietly. It's not a suggestion. It's the voice I used when he was 16 and came home drunk from a party. The voice that says, I'm still his mother, even if he's forgotten what that means. He sits. 40 seconds. Kelsey and Lorraine exchange glances. There's uncertainty in their expressions now, the first crack in their united front of contempt. Good. Let them wonder. Let them feel even a fraction of the anxiety they've caused me for months. 20 seconds. I can hear footsteps on my front walk, the distinctive click of Jennifer's heels on the brick path. The doorbell rings. I'll get it, I say, though no one has moved to answer it. I walk through my dining room, past the mahogany sideboard that Richard and I bought at an estate sale in Boston 30 years ago, past the family photos on the wall, including the one of Elliot at his graduation from Cornell. I remember that day so clearly, how proud I was, how he hugged me and said, I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom. I wonder when exactly that gratitude turned into resentment. I open the door. Douglas Fitzgerald stands on my doorstep, imposing in his charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled even at 7:30 on a Sunday evening. Beside him, Jennifer holds 2 leather portfolios, her expression professionally neutral. They've both been with me for over a decade. They know exactly what these past months have cost me emotionally. Good evening, Mrs. Kingsley, Douglas says formally, though his eyes convey something warmer, concern, support. Thank you for the invitation. Please come in, I respond, stepping back to let them enter. We're just finishing dinner. The look on Kelsey's face when Douglas and Jennifer walk into the dining room carrying those portfolios is something I'll remember for the rest of my life. It's not quite fear yet, but it's no longer smug certainty either. Lorraine has gone very still, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. What the hell is this? Kelsey demands, finding her voice. Who are these people? Douglas sets his portfolio down on the sideboard with deliberate care. I'm Douglas Fitzgerald, Mrs. Kingsley's attorney for the past 15 years, and this is Jennifer Chen, Mrs. Kingsley's personal assistant and executive officer of her family trust. Elliot has gone very pale. Mom, what's happening? I walk back to my place at the head of the table, but I don't sit down. Instead, I stand behind my chair, one hand resting on the carved wooden back that Richard picked out when we first bought this house, when we were young and in love, and thought we had forever, when I thought I'd always have family to fill these seats. What's happening, Elliot, is that I'm done, I say simply. I'm done being disrespected in my own home. I'm done being treated like an obstacle to be tolerated instead of a mother to be honored. I'm done watching you choose comfortable silence over basic human decency. Mom, it was just... Elliot stumbles over his words, and I realize he's about to minimize what just happened. Again. He's about to explain why it wasn't that bad, why I'm overreacting, why I should just let it go. Your wife spit in my food, Elliot, I interrupt, my voice still eerily calm. In my home, at my table. And your response was to tell me to behave. Not her, me. Douglas opens his portfolio. The sound of the leather creaking is loud in the silent room. Mrs. Kingsley contacted me 4 months ago to discuss implementing certain protective measures regarding her estate and her personal boundaries. Given tonight's events, she's decided to execute those measures immediately rather than waiting for the previously discussed timeline. You can't just, Kelsey starts, but Douglas holds up one hand. Actually, Mrs. Pruitt Kingsley, she can, and she has. He pulls out the first document. Over the past 4 months, Mrs. Kingsley has documented 47 separate incidents of verbal and emotional abuse directed at her by you and your mother. She has recordings, text messages, witness statements, and time-stamped evidence of a consistent pattern of hostile behavior. Kelsey's face has gone from flushed to white. You've been recording us? Connecticut is a one-party consent state, Jennifer says coolly. Mrs. Kingsley was well within her legal rights to record conversations occurring in her own home and during phone calls where she was a participant. I watch this information sink in. 4 months. 4 months of smiling through insults while my phone recorded every word. 4 months of saving text messages where Kelsey called me a manipulative bitch and Lorraine referred to me as that uppity bitch who thinks her money makes her special. 4 months of documenting dates, times, witnesses present, specific quotes. 4 months of building an airtight case while they thought I was just taking their abuse like a pathetic old woman too desperate for family to fight back. Tonight's incident constitutes assault, Douglas continues. Deliberately spitting on someone or their property is classified as assault in Connecticut. Mrs. Kingsley would be well within her rights to press criminal charges. Lorraine finally speaks, her voice shrill. Over spit? That's insane. Over a pattern of escalating abuse that culminated in physical assault, yes, Douglas corrects. However, Mrs. Kingsley has decided not to pursue criminal charges at this time, out of consideration for her potential future grandchild. The way Kelsey's hand moves instinctively to her stomach tells me everything I need to know. She's pregnant, maybe 8 or 10 weeks based on that protective gesture. She hasn't told us yet, probably planning some grand announcement she could use to manipulate the situation further. My heart breaks a little more. I might have a grandchild I'll never know, but I can't think about that right now. Right now, I need to finish what I started. Instead, I say, taking over from Douglas, I've implemented other measures. Effective immediately, my estate has been restructured. Elliot, you were set to inherit everything upon my death. $38 million, this house, the vacation property in Martha's Vineyard, my entire stock portfolio, everything I built over 30 years. Elliot looks like he might faint. Was? The assets have been placed in an irrevocable trust, Jennifer explains, pulling out documents. You'll receive a comfortable income from the trust, approximately $200,000 annually. But direct control of the principal will not transfer to you until you turn 45, 13 years from now. And only if you meet certain conditions, I add. Conditions that include completing family therapy with an independent therapist, demonstrating consistent respectful behavior toward me verified by that therapist, and maintaining those standards for a minimum of 3 years before the trust board will even consider releasing control to you. You can't do this, Kelsey shouts, standing up so fast her chair tips backward. That money is Elliot's. He's your son. The money is mine until I die, I correct coldly. I built it. I earned it. I decide what happens to it. And I've decided that I will not fund a lifestyle for someone who allows his mother to be abused in her own home. Douglas places another document on the table. Additionally, Mrs. Pruitt Kingsley, you are not named as a beneficiary in any capacity. In the event of divorce, you will leave the marriage with exactly what you brought into it. The prenuptial agreement your husband signed remains in full effect, including the infidelity clause and the clause regarding mistreatment of family members. Kelsey's eyes go wide. What prenup? We didn't sign a prenup. Elliot's silence is deafening. He did sign one. I insisted on it, and he agreed without telling her. Another secret. Another layer of deception in this family that's forgotten how to be honest with each other. There's more, I continue, because I need to get through all of this before my composure cracks. I've updated my healthcare directives. Elliot, you were my healthcare proxy, the person who would make medical decisions if I couldn't. I've removed you from that role and designated Douglas instead. My son's face crumples. Mom, no. Please, I can't trust you to protect me, Elliot, I say, and my voice finally breaks just slightly. If you can't protect me from your wife spitting in my food, how can I trust you to protect me when I'm vulnerable in a hospital bed? The tears on his face don't move me the way they might have yesterday. Yesterday, I would have crumbled at the sight of my son crying. Today, I just feel tired. Finally, Douglas says, Mrs. Kingsley is implementing a period of no contact. For the next 6 months, you are not to visit this property, contact Mrs. Kingsley directly, or make any requests for financial assistance. All communication will go through my office. After 6 months, if you have completed the requirements outlined in these documents, including active participation in therapy and demonstrable behavior changes, we can discuss the possibility of supervised contact. 6 months? Elliot's voice is barely a whisper. Mom, you can't. I'm your son, your only child, and I love you more than my own life, I tell him honestly. But love doesn't mean letting you treat me as less than human. Love doesn't mean funding your lifestyle while your wife abuses me. Love doesn't mean sacrificing my dignity on the altar of your comfort. I pull out the letter I wrote 3 weeks ago when I knew this moment was coming. My hands shake slightly as I hold it out to him. I wrote this for you. Read it when you're ready to hear it. Elliot takes the envelope with trembling hands. He looks destroyed, and part of me wants to take it all back, to say we can work it out, to be the peacemaker one more time. But I don't, because this isn't about peace. It's about respect. You need to leave now, I say quietly. All 3 of you. Douglas has a temporary restraining order that requires you to stay at least 100 yards from this property for the next 90 days while the court-appointed family therapist completes her initial assessment. This is bullshit, Kelsey screams. You're a manipulative, controlling bitch, and this proves it. This proves that I have limits, I correct. And you finally found them. Congratulations. Douglas and Jennifer stand on either side of me, a united front. Elliot is crying openly now, Kelsey is shaking with rage, and Lorraine looks like she's finally realized that she might have miscalculated badly. They leave. Kelsey storms out first, Lorraine following with one backward glance that might be shock or might be the first hint of understanding. Elliot is last, moving slowly, the envelope clutched in his hand like a lifeline. At the door, he turns back. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't... You knew, I interrupt gently. You just chose not to see. That's not the same thing. The door closes behind them. The house is silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one Richard wound faithfully every Sunday morning for 20 years of our marriage. Douglas puts a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Adrian. I nod, because I know he's right. But knowing something is right doesn't make it hurt less. Jennifer is more practical. I'll clear the table. You should sit down. You've been standing for 20 minutes. Has it only been 20 minutes? It feels like hours. It feels like my entire life has reorganized itself in the space between Kelsey spitting in my plate and the sound of their car pulling away from my curb. I sink into my chair at the head of the table and stare at the ruined risotto that started all of this, the evidence of such casual cruelty, such profound disrespect. And I think about how many other humiliations I swallowed, how many other moments I let pass because I was afraid of losing my son. I lost him anyway. Or maybe I never really had him, not in the way I thought. But at least now I have my dignity back. At least now I have my self-respect. And maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of teaching my son what unconditional love actually means. Not unconditional tolerance of abuse, but unconditional commitment to his well-being, even when that means setting boundaries he doesn't want. Even when it means breaking both our hearts to save whatever chance we have at a real relationship someday. Douglas and Jennifer stay with me for another hour, making sure I'm okay, reviewing the legal protections now in place. When they finally leave, the house feels cavernous, empty, silent. But it's a dignified silence. Not the silence of swallowing insults, the silence of peace. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if Elliot will do the work, if Kelsey will change, if I'll ever meet my grandchild. But I know I did the right thing. And tonight, in my empty house with my self-respect intact, that has to be enough. I met Kelsey 3 years ago on a warm September evening when Elliot brought her to dinner for the first time. He'd been dating her for about 4 months, and I could tell from the nervous energy in his voice when he called that this one was different. This one mattered. I wanted so badly to make a good impression. I cleaned the house myself, even though I have a service that comes twice a week. I cooked Elliot's favorite meal, the herb-crusted lamb I used to make for his birthday when he was growing up. I wore a simple dress, nothing too formal, nothing that would make her feel underdressed or uncomfortable. I was so conscious of not being the intimidating, wealthy mother-in-law, the woman who makes the girlfriend feel inadequate. Kelsey arrived in a Target dress with nervous hands and big eyes. She was 26, pretty in an understated way, with long brown hair and a habit of tucking it behind her ear when she was anxious. She worked in marketing for a small startup, lived in a studio apartment in Stamford, drove a 10-year-old Honda. Elliot told me she'd grown up in New Haven, raised by a single mother after her father left when she was 7. My heart went out to her immediately. I understood struggle. I understood what it meant to fight for everything you had. I came from a middle-class family in Ohio, worked my way through state college on scholarships and waitressing tips, started my consulting firm in a shared office space when I was 28 years old with $5,000 in savings and a dream that everyone told me was unrealistic for a woman. That first dinner, I tried to connect with her. I asked about her work, her interests, her family. I shared stories about my own journey, about building my business from nothing, about the challenges I faced as a young woman in the corporate world. I thought we were bonding. I thought she appreciated hearing that I wasn't born into wealth, that I understood what it meant to earn your place. But every time I spoke, I saw something flicker across her face, something I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't until months later that I recognized it as resentment. She interpreted my success story as bragging. My attempts to show her we had common ground felt to her like I was highlighting the differences between us. When I offered to introduce her to contacts in my network who could help her career, she heard it as me saying she wasn't capable on her own. When I gave them money for a down payment on a nicer apartment, she told Elliot I was trying to control them with my wealth. I didn't understand it at first. I genuinely didn't. I kept trying harder, kept reaching out, kept offering help and support. And the more I tried, the more she pulled away, the colder she became. Richard would have known what to do. My husband had an emotional intelligence I've never possessed, an ability to read people and navigate relationships that I always envied. He was the one who smoothed over conflicts, who brought people together, who knew exactly the right thing to say to make someone feel valued. When he died 8 years ago, suddenly and without warning on a Tuesday morning, I lost my partner, my best friend, and my translator for human connection all at once. Elliot was 24 when his father died, just graduated from Cornell, just starting his career, still figuring out who he wanted to be. He and Richard had been so close, talking every day, sharing a love of architecture and design that I never quite understood but always supported. Richard's death devastated him in ways I couldn't reach. I tried. God knows I tried. But grief made us both clumsy with each other. I threw myself into work, into building the company bigger and stronger, into securing our financial future so Elliot would never have to worry the way I worried growing up. He threw himself into his career, working 80-hour weeks, dating casually but never seriously, visiting me for holidays but keeping emotional distance. When he met Kelsey, I was so hopeful. He seemed lighter, happier, more engaged with life. I wanted her to be good for him. I wanted to welcome her into our small family, to finally have someone to share holidays with, to build new traditions after so many years of it being just Elliot and me rattling around in this big house. The engagement happened fast. They'd been dating 10 months when Elliot called to tell me he'd proposed. I was thrilled. I offered to pay for the wedding, to host it here at the house with its beautiful gardens, to make it as special as they wanted. Kelsey refused. She wanted a small ceremony, just immediate family, at a restaurant in New Haven, near where she grew up. I attended with a smile on my face while her friends whispered about the rich mother-in-law. And Lorraine, Kelsey's mother, made pointed comments about people who flash money around like it makes them better than everyone else. I gave them $50,000 as a wedding gift, a check Kelsey didn't even thank me for. The marriage changed everything. Suddenly, Elliot was canceling our weekly dinners. When we did see each other, Kelsey dominated the conversation, often contradicting things I said or making subtle digs about my lifestyle, my house, my excessive spending on quality furniture or organic food. Lorraine came to every family gathering, and the two of them formed a united front of judgment and contempt. I started noticing Elliot changing. He stopped sharing details about his work. He became defensive when I asked questions about their lives. He started sentences with "Kelsey thinks" or "Kelsey says," as if his own opinions had been replaced by hers. When I gently suggested that newlyweds sometimes benefit from establishing their own identity as a couple separate from extended family, he accused me of trying to drive a wedge between him and his wife. 6 months into the marriage, I overheard Kelsey on the phone while she was in my powder room during a Sunday dinner. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping. I was just walking past to get something from the kitchen, but her voice carried sharp and angry. "I don't care what she wants, Mom. This is our life, not hers. Just because she's sitting on millions doesn't mean she gets to control us forever. Trust me, the second that old bat dies, we're done with all this fake family dinner bullshit." I stood frozen in the hallway, those words cutting deeper than any business rival's insult ever had. Old bat, fake family dinner bullshit, counting the days until I died. That's when I started really paying attention. That's when I began to notice the patterns I'd been too hopeful to see before. The eye rolls when I spoke. The way Kelsey always had a reason why they couldn't make family events I'd planned weeks in advance, but never missed her mother's gatherings. The comments about my obsession with Elliot whenever I asked if he was okay or expressed concern about how stressed he seemed. I documented everything after that. Not because I was planning anything specific, but because I'm a businesswoman, and businesswomen keep records. Every text message where Kelsey was rude or dismissive. Every time Lorraine made a comment about rich bitches in my presence. Every occasion where Elliot chose his wife's comfort over basic respect for his mother. The breaking point before tonight came 3 weeks ago. Elliot called asking to borrow $80,000. Not for an emergency, not for a medical crisis, but for Kelsey to open a boutique. She'd been planning it for months, apparently, without mentioning it to me once, and now they needed capital fast to secure a retail space. I asked reasonable questions. Did they have a business plan? Had they done market research? What was the expected timeline for profitability? Basic questions any investor would ask, questions I would have asked about any business opportunity. Elliot got angry. "Why do you have to interrogate everything, Mom? Why can't you just support us? Kelsey is really hurt that you don't believe in her." I tried to explain that asking for a business plan wasn't a lack of belief. It was standard due diligence. That I'd be happy to look at their projections and potentially invest if the fundamentals were sound. But he'd already decided I was the villain in this story. "You know what? Forget it," he said. "We'll figure it out ourselves. Kelsey was right. You use your money to control people. That's all you know how to do." He hung up before I could respond. I sat in my office staring at my phone, wondering how the son I raised, the boy I sacrificed so much for, could believe such a thing about me. That's when I called Douglas and told him we needed to accelerate our timeline. That's when I realized that hoping things would get better was just another form of accepting abuse. That's when I understood that my silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was teaching my son that his mother's dignity was negotiable. Over the next 3 weeks, Douglas and Jennifer helped me put everything in place. We restructured the estate, updated all my legal documents, gathered all the evidence I'd been collecting, and prepared for multiple scenarios. I knew something would eventually push things over the edge. I just didn't know it would be Kelsey literally spitting on me in my own home. The afternoon before tonight's dinner, Jennifer asked me if I was sure. If I was really ready to implement such dramatic measures, to potentially lose my relationship with my son, to accept that I might never know my future grandchildren. I told her about a meeting I had years ago with a CEO who was being blackmailed by a business partner. He was terrified of the consequences of standing up for himself, convinced that exposing the blackmail would destroy his reputation and his company. I told him that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything, to show that you won't be controlled by fear of loss. He took my advice. The fallout was brutal, but temporary. Within a year, his company was stronger than ever, and the partner who'd been blackmailing him was in prison. Sometimes you have to be willing to burn it all down to save what really matters. What really matters isn't keeping my son close while he watches his wife abuse me. What really matters is teaching him what real love looks like, real respect, real family, even if that lesson costs me everything. Tonight, watching them leave, seeing Elliot's devastated face, feeling the crushing weight of an empty house, I have no idea if I made the right choice. I won't know for months, maybe years, but I do know I couldn't keep living the way I was. I couldn't keep swallowing humiliation and calling it love. I couldn't keep funding a lifestyle for people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM machine with an inconvenient expiration date. Richard used to say that the hardest part of parenting is knowing when to hold on and when to let go. When Elliot was learning to ride a bike, Richard ran beside him for weeks, holding the seat, keeping him steady. Then one day, without telling Elliot, Richard let go. Elliot rode for 20 feet before he realized his father wasn't holding on anymore. He wobbled, almost fell, but caught himself and kept going. He would have kept depending on me forever if I kept holding on. Richard explained that night. Sometimes love means trusting them to fall and trusting them to get back up. Tonight, I let go. My son is wobbling. He might fall. And I have to trust that the values I instilled in him for 32 years are strong enough that he'll eventually find his balance. Even if it takes him years. Even if he falls hard first. Even if he never forgives me for loving him enough to let go. The first week after that Sunday dinner, I barely slept. I kept expecting Elliot to call, to show up at the door, to demand we talk this through like adults. But my phone stayed silent except for notifications from Douglas, updating me on the legal proceedings. The temporary restraining order was filed. The family therapist, Dr. Patricia Morrison, was assigned by the court. The trust documents were registered and notarized. Everything was moving forward with cold legal efficiency, while my heart felt like it was breaking in slow motion. Jennifer came by every morning that first week, ostensibly to review paperwork, but really to make sure I was eating, sleeping, functioning. She found me on day 3 still in my robe at 11 in the morning, staring at photo albums from when Elliot was young. Birthday parties, school plays, vacations to Disney World, where he wore Mickey Mouse ears and held my hand everywhere we went. When did I lose him? I asked her, not expecting an answer. When did I become the enemy? Jennifer sat beside me on the couch, looking at a photo of 10-year-old Elliot grinning with his 2 front teeth missing. You didn't lose him, Adrienne. He lost his way. There's a difference. On day 8, I received the first communication through Douglas's office. It was a letter from Elliot, handwritten, 5 pages long. Douglas asked if I wanted him to screen it first. I told him no. Whatever my son had to say, I needed to hear it directly. I read it alone in my study, with a glass of wine I didn't drink and tears I couldn't stop. The letter started with apologies. He was sorry for how things escalated. Sorry for not defending me. Sorry for making me feel like I had to take such drastic measures. But by the second page, the apologies shifted into justifications. Kelsey had a difficult childhood. She struggled with feeling inadequate around me. She didn't mean the things she said when she was emotional. Her spitting in my food was a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by stress about the pregnancy. The pregnancy. He confirmed it, buried in the middle of page 3 like it was an afterthought. Kelsey was 11 weeks along. They'd been planning to announce it at that dinner before everything went wrong. He wanted me to understand that the stress of the pregnancy was making Kelsey more reactive than usual. He wanted me to consider how my actions were affecting not just them, but my future grandchild. By page 4, the letter had fully transformed from apology to accusation. I was being unreasonable. The restrictions I'd put in place were excessive. Taking away his inheritance and his role as my healthcare proxy was cruel and vindictive. Requiring 6 months of no contact was designed to punish him, not help anyone heal. Kelsey's mother, Lorraine, had hired a lawyer, and they were exploring whether my actions constituted elder abuse or coercion under duress. The letter ended with an ultimatum disguised as an olive branch. If I dropped the restraining order, restored the inheritance, and agreed to family therapy without any preconditions, he would be willing to work on rebuilding trust. But if I insisted on maintaining these draconian measures, I was forcing him to choose between his wife and child and his mother. "And Mom," the final paragraph read, "if you make me choose, I'll choose my family. The family I'm building. I hope you can understand that." I sat in my study for 3 hours after reading that letter, watching the sun set through the window, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The grief was still there, sharp and overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, something harder, something like clarity. My son didn't want reconciliation. He wanted capitulation. He wanted me to fund their life, accept their abuse, and be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. And he was willing to use my grandchild as leverage to force my compliance. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right decision. I called Douglas at home that evening, something I rarely did. The letter Elliot sent. "I need you to keep it in the file. It's evidence." "Evidence of what?" Douglas asked carefully. "Evidence that this isn't about love. It's about money. And evidence that I'm going to need to protect myself legally for the long term, not just 6 months." Douglas was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure, Adrienne? Once we move into that posture, it becomes much harder to walk back." "I'm sure." The second week, Lorraine made her move. She showed up at my office building downtown, somehow getting past building security by claiming to be a client. My receptionist buzzed me in a panic. "Mrs. Kingsley, there's a woman here who says she's your son's mother-in-law and she's refusing to leave until you see her." I could have called security. I could have had her escorted out and filed a violation of the restraining order. Instead, I told my receptionist to send her up. Some conversations need to happen face to face. Lorraine walked into my corner office looking like she'd dressed for battle. Cheap suit from JCPenney, scuffed shoes, hair pulled back in a tight bun that emphasized the hard lines of her face. She was 52, but looked older, worn down by decades of physical labor and financial stress. I felt a pang of empathy despite everything. Life hadn't been kind to this woman. "You've got some nerve," she started before she'd even fully entered the room. "Treating my daughter like trash, threatening my son-in-law, acting like you're better than all of us just because you've got money." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit down, Lorraine. If we're going to do this, let's do it properly." She sat, but reluctantly, perching on the edge of the chair like she might need to bolt at any moment. I studied her across my desk. This woman who'd raised her daughter alone while working 3 jobs, who'd sacrificed everything to give Kelsey opportunities she never had, who'd instilled in her daughter such a profound sense of inadequacy that it had curdled into toxic resentment. "I'm going to say something to you," I began carefully, "and I need you to really hear it. Not react to it, not immediately argue with it. Just hear it." Lorraine crossed her arms defensively, but nodded. "You worked your entire life. You raised a daughter by yourself after your husband abandoned you. You did everything humanly possible to give her a better life than you had, and every single bit of that deserves respect. I mean that genuinely." I saw confusion flicker across her face. This wasn't what she'd expected. "But somewhere along the way," I continued, "you taught your daughter that successful women are the enemy, that women who have money didn't earn it, that we're all just lucky, or married well, or had it handed to us. You taught her that feeling inadequate means someone is making her feel that way rather than something she needs to work through herself." "That's not," Lorraine started, but I held up a hand. "I built my company from nothing, Lorraine. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Ohio with parents who worked factory jobs. I put myself through college on scholarships and waited tables until my hands were raw. I started my business with $5,000 and a dream that everyone told me was impossible for a woman. I worked 80-hour weeks for 15 years while raising my son alone after my husband died. Everything I have, I earned." Lorraine's jaw was tight, but she was listening. "And the first time I met your daughter, I tried to share that with her, to show her we weren't so different, to offer her the same mentorship and support that other women gave me when I was starting out. but every single gesture was interpreted as an attack. Every offer of help was seen as me saying she wasn't good enough. Every story about my struggles was heard as me bragging. Because you were, Lorraine snapped. Every time you talked about your company, your success, your fancy house, you were rubbing it in her face that she doesn't have those things. No, I said firmly. Every time I talked about my life, your daughter chose to hear it as judgment. There's a difference, and that difference is the lens of resentment that you helped create. Lorraine stood up abruptly. I didn't come here to be lectured by someone who thinks her money makes her wise. You came here to tell me I'm a terrible person for setting boundaries, I corrected. You came here to defend your daughter spitting in my food. You came here to try to bully me into accepting abuse because in your worldview, I deserve it for having more than you do. Damn right you deserve it, Lorraine shot back. And for the first time, real honesty broke through. Do you have any idea what it's like to work 3 jobs and still not make ends meet? To watch your daughter get a scholarship to a good school and have to pack her lunch in a paper bag while her classmates have designer lunch boxes? To know that no matter how hard you work, people like you will always have more, have better, have easier? Yes, I said quietly. I do know. Because I was your daughter, Lorraine. I was the scholarship kid with the paper bag lunch. I was the one wearing Goodwill clothes while my classmates had new outfits every season. I know exactly what that feels like. Then how can you do this to Kelsey? Lorraine's voice cracked. How can you hold money over her head, threaten to cut off her husband, keep her child away from a grandmother? I'm not doing anything to Kelsey, I said, standing to face her across my desk. I'm protecting myself from Kelsey. There's a difference. And the fact that you can't see that difference is why we're in this situation. Lorraine stared at me for a long moment. I saw decades of pain in her eyes, years of humiliation and struggle and never quite being enough. And I saw something else. I saw that she genuinely couldn't understand why spitting in someone's food warranted consequences. In her mind, wealthy people deserved whatever disrespect they got because the very existence of inequality was an insult to people like her. Get out, I said tiredly. Go home. Tell your daughter and my son that intimidation won't work. Tell them that I'm not backing down. And tell them that the clock on those 6 months doesn't start until they comply with the therapy requirements. If they spend the next year fighting me, they'll spend the year after that in no contact. This can be 6 months or 6 years. It's entirely up to them. Lorraine left without another word, slamming my office door hard enough that my receptionist jumped. I stood at my window overlooking the city, watching traffic move like blood through arteries, and wondered if I just made things worse or better. That night, I got my answer. At 2 a.m, my phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Kingsley? A young woman's voice, uncertain and scared. This is Grace Mitchell. I worked with Kelsey at her last job. I'm sorry to call so late, but I saw on Facebook that there was some family trouble, and I thought you should know something. I sat up in bed, fully awake now. What should I know? Kelsey got fired from her job 3 months ago. She didn't quit to start a boutique. She was fired for stealing from the company, not money, but proprietary information. She was planning to use our client lists and marketing strategies for her own business. They didn't press charges because they didn't want the publicity, but they made it clear she'd never work in marketing in this area again. My blood ran cold. Does Elliot know? I don't think so. She told everyone she quit. But Mrs. Kingsley, there's more. She's been talking to some of our former co-workers about suing you. Something about undue influence and emotional manipulation. She's trying to build a case that you're mentally unfit and that the changes you made to your estate should be invalidated. I thanked Grace for the information and hung up. I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I called Douglas's emergency line and told him everything. By morning, we had a private investigator looking into Kelsey's employment history and any conversations she'd had with lawyers about contesting my estate plans. The investigation took 2 weeks. What it uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. Kelsey hadn't just been fired from 1 job. She'd been fired from 3 in the past 5 years, always for the same basic reason: dishonesty, inflating numbers on reports, taking credit for other people's work, in one case creating fake client testimonials for a portfolio. She wasn't the struggling victim of circumstance that Elliot believed. She was a pattern liar who'd learned to use her difficult childhood as a shield against accountability. The investigator also found evidence that Kelsey had convinced Elliot to take out a $70,000 personal loan 6 months ago, telling him it was for her mother's medical bills. Lorraine had no medical bills. The money had gone to paying off Kelsey's credit cards, which she'd maxed out on designer clothes, expensive dinners, and a trip to Aruba she'd told Elliot was a work conference. My son had been systematically lied to and manipulated for years. And because I was the one pointing it out, because I was the one with evidence of her deception, I would be seen as the villain trying to destroy his marriage. I was right. When Douglas presented the evidence to Elliot through his lawyer, as required by the terms of the restraining order, Elliot's response was immediate and furious. Another letter, this time typed and formal, accusing me of hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on his wife, of trying to destroy his marriage, of being unable to accept that he'd chosen someone else to build a life with. "You're so desperate to control me that you'll destroy the woman I love," he wrote. "You'll hire people to invade our privacy, to twist facts, to make Kelsey look like a villain when she's just a woman trying to build a life against impossible odds. I thought you were better than this, Mom. I thought you understood what it meant to struggle. But you've become exactly what Kelsey always said you were. A rich, controlling woman who uses money as a weapon." That letter broke something in me that all the previous hurt hadn't touched. It wasn't just that he didn't believe me. It was that he couldn't even consider the possibility that I was telling the truth. His loyalty to Kelsey was so absolute that evidence, facts, documentation meant nothing compared to her tears and manipulations. Jennifer found me crying in my study that afternoon. She read the letter, then sat beside me on the couch and held my hand while I fell apart. "He hates me," I said through tears. "My son actually hates me." "He doesn't hate you," Jennifer said gently. "He's confused and manipulated and scared. But underneath all that, he still loves you. He's just lost right now." "What if he never finds his way back?" Jennifer didn't answer, because we both knew there was no good answer to that question. The next month was a special kind of hell. Through Douglas, I learned that Kelsey was indeed consulting with lawyers about contesting my estate changes. None would take her case. The documentation was too thorough, the evidence of abuse too clear, the legal protections too solid. But she kept trying, convinced that my money should be hers by marriage, that my death would solve all her problems. I learned through the family therapist, Dr. Morrison, that Elliot had attended one session and then refused to continue. He claimed the therapist was biased in my favor because I was paying her fees, even though she was court-appointed and we'd both signed agreements about her neutrality. He said the whole process was rigged against him. I learned through friends in the architecture community that Elliot's work was suffering. He was distracted, missing deadlines, showing up to meetings unprepared. His boss had given him a formal warning. His carefully built career was crumbling under the weight of his personal life, and he blamed me for all of it. And I learned, through a brief and painful conversation with Dr. Morrison after she'd met with Kelsey once, that my daughter-in-law had no intention of changing. "She believes she's the victim here," Dr. Morrison told me carefully. "She sees your success as theft, your boundaries as abuse, your love for your son as possessiveness. Without significant personal work, which she's not willing to do, there's no path forward." "What about Elliot?" I asked. "What about my son?" "He's trauma-bonded to her," Dr. Morrison explained. "His father's death left him with abandonment issues he never properly processed. Kelsey's manipulation taps into his deepest fear, being left alone. She's convinced him that you're the threat to his stability, not her. Until he's willing to see that, nothing will change." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall of my study. Photographs of Elliot at every age smiled back at me. The boy who held my hand, the teenager who told me I was his hero, the young man who said he couldn't have built his life without me. All of them were gone now, replaced by a stranger who saw me as his enemy. The third month brought the final blow. Elliot sent formal notice through his lawyer that he was cutting off all contact indefinitely. Not 6 months, not a year, indefinitely. He would not participate in therapy. He would not communicate through Douglas. He would not consider reconciliation under any terms that involved criticism of Kelsey or requirements that she change her behavior. "Your son has made his choice," Douglas told me gently when he delivered the news. Now, you have to make yours. Do you maintain the boundaries you've set, knowing it might mean never having a relationship with him again? Or do you capitulate, knowing it means accepting abuse for whatever time you have left? I thought about Richard, about what he would say if he were here, about the man who taught our son to ride a bike by letting go. We maintain the boundaries, I said. We protect the estate, we document everything, and we prepare for the possibility that my son never comes back. Douglas nodded. I'll draw up the additional protections, but Adrian, I have to ask, at what point is the principal not worth the cost? I looked at him, this man who'd been my lawyer and friend for 15 years. The principal is all I have left, Douglas. If I give it up, what's left of me? He didn't have an answer for that either. That night, I sat alone in my beautiful house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. I poured a glass of the expensive wine Elliot used to love, the Bordeaux we'd share on special occasions, and I toasted the empty room. To principles, I said to no one. To dignity. To the hope that someday, somehow, he'll understand that I loved him enough to let him go. The wine tasted like ashes, but I drank it anyway. Because sometimes the right thing and the unbearably painful thing are exactly the same thing. And you do it anyway. 4 months into the no-contact period, something happened that I never could have anticipated. I was at my annual physical, the routine checkup I scheduled every November like clockwork. Doctor? Sarah Chen had been my physician for 12 years, knew my health history inside and out, and usually spent our appointments telling me I was in remarkable shape for 57 and to keep doing whatever I was doing. This appointment was different. She found a lump during the breast exam. Small, hard, irregular. The kind of thing that makes a doctor's face go very still and very professional. She ordered a mammogram immediately, same day, and when those results came back concerning, an ultrasound and biopsy within 48 hours. I sat in her office a week later, listening to words that didn't quite seem real. Stage 2 breast cancer, invasive ductal carcinoma. Treatable, she emphasized, very treatable with modern protocols, but it would require surgery, likely a lumpectomy, followed by radiation and possibly chemotherapy, depending on the pathology results. You'll need someone with you, Dr. Chen said gently. For the surgery, for recovery, for appointments. Do you have family who can help? I thought about Elliot, somewhere in Connecticut, living his life without me. I thought about the grandson, or granddaughter I'd never met, now 3 months old according to the birth announcement I'd received through Douglas's office. A girl. They'd named her Emma. They hadn't invited me to meet her. I have people, I told Dr. Chen, which was technically true. Jennifer would help. Douglas would be there. I had friends from my business days, people I'd worked with, connections built over decades of professional success. But I didn't have family. Not anymore. I drove home in a daze, pulled into my garage, and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Cancer. The word kept echoing in my head, bringing with it memories of Richard's mother, who died of breast cancer when Elliot was 8. She'd fought for 3 years, and I'd watched my husband care for her with such tenderness, such devotion. I'd watched Elliot, confused and scared, trying to understand why Grandma was getting sicker instead of better, and I'd promised myself then that if I ever got sick, I'd fight like hell. For Richard, for Elliot, for whatever time I had left. Now I was sick, and there was no one to fight for. Douglas came to my house that evening after I called him. He listened to the diagnosis, asked practical questions about treatment timelines and prognosis, and then said the thing I'd been trying not to think about. You need to tell Elliot. No, I said immediately. Absolutely not. Adrian, he's your son. He has a right to know his mother has cancer. He gave up that right when he chose his wife over basic human decency, I snapped. Then, more quietly, I won't use my illness to manipulate him. I won't be that person. Douglas studied me for a long moment. That's not what this is. This is information he deserves to have. What he does with it is his choice. And what if he does nothing? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if I tell him I have cancer and he still doesn't come? What if I die never having reconciled with my son because he chose her over me even when I was sick? Then you'll know, Douglas said gently. You'll know who he really is, and you'll know you gave him every chance. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, in the house that felt too big and too empty, and thought about all the ways this could go. I thought about Kelsey using my illness as leverage, demanding access to my money in exchange for allowing Elliot to visit. I thought about my son feeling obligated to care for me out of guilt rather than love. I thought about dying alone, estranged from the only family I had left, but I also thought about something else. About the letter I'd written to Elliot that night, the one he'd received but apparently never really read. About the words I'd put in there for exactly this kind of moment. I will always be your mother. No matter how much time or distance separates us, no matter what choices you make or what pain we cause each other, that bond is unbreakable. I'm here when you're ready. I'll always be here. I'd meant those words when I wrote them. Did I still mean them now, facing cancer, facing the real possibility that always might not be as long as I'd assumed? Yes. God help me, yes. In the morning, I called Douglas and told him to draft a letter. Not an emotional appeal, not manipulation through sympathy, just facts. I'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. I was pursuing treatment. I'd updated my healthcare directives to reflect the diagnosis. Douglas would continue to serve as my healthcare proxy. Elliot should know that his mother was facing a serious illness, and what he chose to do with that information was entirely up to him. The letter went out through Douglas's office the next day. I waited for a response, alternating between hope and dread. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. Nothing. My son knew I had cancer, and he said nothing. That silence hurt worse than any of the insults, worse than the restraining order violations, worse than the letters full of accusations. That silence told me everything I'd been afraid to know. In his mind, I'd become so monstrous, so irredeemable, that even cancer didn't warrant basic human compassion. I scheduled my surgery for the week before Christmas, lumpectomy followed by sentinel lymph node biopsy to check if the cancer had spread. Dr. Chen was optimistic about the prognosis, but optimistic didn't mean certain. There were risks. There were complications that could happen. There was a real possibility, however small, that I might die on that operating table. And my son wouldn't know until it was over. If I survived, if I didn't, well, then Douglas would notify him according to the protocols we'd established. The night before my surgery, I did something I hadn't done in months. I wrote another letter to Elliot. Not to send, just for me, just to put into words everything I'd been holding inside. My dear son, I wrote, tomorrow I'm having surgery to remove cancer from my breast. I'm 57 years old, and I'm more afraid than I've ever been in my life. Not of the cancer, not of the surgery, but of dying without you knowing how much I love you, of leaving this world with you believing that I was your enemy instead of your mother. I know you think I chose money over family, that I'm punishing you for loving Kelsey. But Elliot, I didn't choose money. I chose dignity. I chose self-respect. I chose to teach you, even if you never learn it, that love without respect isn't really love at all. Your wife spit in my food, in my home, at my table, and you asked me to behave. Do you understand what that did to me? Do you understand what it means when your only child watches someone degrade you and asks you not to defend yourself? I wanted to give you everything: security, opportunity, freedom. I worked myself to exhaustion to build a life where you'd never have to struggle the way I did. And somehow, that became a weapon used against me. My success became proof of my failure as a mother. If I don't survive tomorrow, I need you to know, I forgive you. I forgive you for choosing her. I forgive you for the silence. I forgive you for letting me face cancer alone. Because that's what mothers do. We forgive the unforgivable. We love when it's not returned. We hope even when hope is foolish. But I also need you to know you were wrong. About me. About what happened. About who was really trying to protect this family. Someday, maybe you'll see that. Maybe you won't. Either way, you were loved. Completely. Unconditionally. Even when you made it nearly impossible to show you that love. Be good, my son. Be better than this. Be the man your father and I raised you to be. All my love, always, Mom. I sealed the letter in an envelope and gave it to Jennifer with instructions. If something happens to me tomorrow, make sure he gets this. If I'm fine, keep it. I don't know. Maybe I'll give it to him someday when we've found our way back to each other. If we ever do. Jennifer took the envelope with tears in her eyes. "You're going to be fine. The surgery will go perfectly, and you'll beat this, and someday Elliot will wake up and realize what he's lost." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe this is just how the story ends. Mother and son, separated by pride and manipulation and wounds too deep to heal." "That's not the ending," Jennifer insisted. "That's just the middle, the hard part, the part where it looks like all hope is lost." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe there was still a path back to my son, still a chance for reconciliation, still hope that this nightmare would somehow transform into something bearable. But hope, I'd learned, could be its own kind of cruelty. Sometimes the kindest thing you could do for yourself was accept reality instead of clinging to the possibility of miracles. Tomorrow, I'd have surgery. I'd fight cancer with every resource available to me. I'd survive or I wouldn't, and either way, my son had made his choice. Now I had to make peace with mine. The surgery went well. Better than expected, actually. Dr. Chen removed the tumor with clear margins, and the sentinel lymph node biopsy came back negative. The cancer hadn't spread. With radiation treatment, my prognosis was excellent. I should be grateful, relieved, celebrating this victory. Instead, I woke up in recovery feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Jennifer was there, of course. She held my hand as I came out of anesthesia, helped me sip water, made sure the nurses knew I needed extra pillows. Douglas stopped by that evening with flowers and updates on estate matters he thought might distract me. Friends from my business days sent cards and fruit baskets. But the chair beside my hospital bed, the one meant for family, stayed empty. I spent 3 days in the hospital, then went home to begin the long recovery process. Jennifer had arranged for a private nurse for the first week, a kind woman named Patricia who monitored my drains and helped me shower and pretended not to notice when I cried for no apparent reason. 2 weeks after surgery, I started radiation treatment. 5 days a week for 6 weeks, lying on a table while invisible beams targeted the tissue where cancer had lived. The treatments themselves were painless, quick, almost absurdly mundane for something so consequential. But the cumulative effects were brutal. Fatigue that felt like drowning, skin burns that made wearing a bra agony, emotional fragility that had me sobbing over television commercials. Through it all, Elliot's silence persisted like a physical presence in my house. I'd given up expecting contact. I'd accepted that my son had written me off completely, that whatever Kelsey had told him about me had calcified into absolute truth in his mind. I'd accepted that I might die someday without ever holding my granddaughter, without ever hearing my son's voice again. But acceptance didn't mean it didn't hurt. I was 6 weeks into radiation, starting to see light at the end of the tunnel, when Jennifer came to one of my appointments looking unusually tense. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. She waited until we were in her car, driving back to my house, before she answered. "I got a call this morning from Grace Mitchell." "You remember her? The woman who first told you about Kelsey being fired?" "Of course. She wanted you to know that Kelsey's been posting on social media. About you, about the estrangement, building a narrative." My stomach clenched. "What kind of narrative?" Jennifer pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. "She's telling people that you're a narcissistic mother who's trying to destroy her son's marriage out of jealousy. That you've cut them off financially because Elliot chose his wife over his controlling mother. That you've turned the entire family against her for no reason, except that she comes from a poor background, and you're classist. Does she mention that she spit in my food? She says that never happened. She says you made it up to justify your cruelty. She's even suggesting that your cancer diagnosis might be exaggerated or fabricated to gain sympathy and manipulate Elliot into coming back to you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat in Jennifer's car, staring at my house, processing the fact that my daughter-in-law was publicly calling me a liar about having cancer. "There's more," Jennifer said quietly. She started a GoFundMe for legal fees to fight a wealthy mother-in-law's financial abuse. It's raised $43,000 in 3 days. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The sound was harsh, almost hysterical. But once I started, I couldn't stop. Kelsey was crowdfunding her fight against me while I was recovering from cancer surgery. The absurdity of it, the sheer audacity, was almost admirable in its shamelessness. "Adrienne," Jennifer looked worried. "Are you okay?" "No," I said, still laughing through tears I couldn't quite identify as grief or rage or exhaustion. No, I'm really not okay, but I will be. That night, I did something I hadn't done since the restraining order was put in place. I looked at Kelsey's social media. Every post, every comment, every carefully crafted piece of the narrative she was building. She'd posted photos of herself pregnant, looking vulnerable and young. Captions about fighting for my family against someone who has unlimited resources to destroy us. She'd shared screenshots of the trust documents, with my conditions highlighted and captioned, "Is this what a loving grandmother does?" The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of her. Hundreds of people calling me a monster, a narcissist, a bitter old woman who couldn't accept that her son had grown up. People sharing their own stories of difficult mother-in-laws, of toxic family members, of cutting off relatives for their own mental health. She'd positioned herself as the victim, fighting against impossible odds. And it was working. What none of these people knew, what none of them could see from her carefully curated posts, was the abuse that had led to this moment. The documented incidents, the witnesses, the recording of her literally spitting in my food, the evidence of her lies to Elliot, her theft from employers, her manipulation of every situation to serve her needs. But those were private facts, sealed in legal documents, protected by restraining orders and attorney-client privilege. I couldn't defend myself publicly without violating court orders or exposing myself to lawsuits. Kelsey knew that. She was banking on it. I called Douglas at 10 o'clock that night, knowing he'd still be awake. She's trying to destroy my reputation. She's building a public case that I'm an abuser so that when she eventually contests the estate, she'll have public opinion on her side. I know, Douglas said. I've been monitoring it. We have options, but they're limited. We could sue for defamation, but that would require taking her to court, making everything public, turning this into a spectacle. What if we just release the evidence, I asked. The recordings, the documentation, let people see what really happened. Then you look vindictive, Douglas said bluntly. A wealthy woman using her resources to publicly humiliate a young mother. It doesn't matter that the evidence is real. The optics would be terrible. He was right, and I knew it. There was no way to win this battle in the court of public opinion. Kelsey had cast herself perfectly. Young, poor, pregnant, fighting against a rich, older woman. It didn't matter what the truth was. The narrative was too compelling. So what do? I asked, hearing the exhaustion in my own voice. Just let her destroy me? Let her tell everyone I'm a monster? Let her raise money to fight me using lies? You do what you've been doing, Douglas said firmly. You maintain your boundaries. You protect your legal position. You get through your treatment. You survive. And you trust that truth has a way of emerging eventually. I wanted to believe him, but I'd lived long enough to know that truth didn't always win. Sometimes lies were just more convenient, more comfortable, more satisfying than reality. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, my radiation-burned skin aching, my mind spinning through scenarios and possibilities. I kept coming back to one terrible question. Had I been wrong? Not about the abuse, not about needing boundaries, but about the approach. Should I have tried harder to work things out before implementing such dramatic measures? Should I have given Elliot more chances, more time, more grace? At 3 a.m, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Kingsley? A man's voice, young, uncertain. This is Derek Chen. I work at Elliot's architecture firm. I'm so sorry to call this late, but I thought you should know. Elliot's in the hospital. My heart stopped. What happened? He collapsed at work this afternoon. They think it was a panic attack, but they're running tests to make sure it's not his heart. He's at Greenwich Hospital. I know you two aren't speaking, but he's your son, and— Thank you, I interrupted. Thank you for calling. I hung up and sat in my bed, trembling. Elliot was in the hospital. My son was in the hospital. And because of the restraining order I'd put in place, he probably hadn't even listed me as an emergency contact. The hospital wouldn't call me. Kelsey certainly wouldn't. If Derek hadn't reached out, I might never have known. I called Douglas. I need to know if I can go to the hospital without violating the restraining order. Adrian, it's 3 a.m. Douglas, Elliot's in the hospital. I need to know if I can see my son. There was a pause. Technically, the order restricts them from contacting you, not the other way around. But if Kelsey's there and objects to your presence, it could get complicated. Are you sure you want to do this? Was I sure? My son was in the hospital, possibly with heart problems at 32 years old. Of course I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore except that 4 months of silence hadn't changed how I felt about him. I'm going, I said. Figure out the legalities if it becomes a problem. I dressed quickly, threw on a scarf to cover my radiation-burned chest, and drove to Greenwich Hospital. At 4 in the morning, the roads were empty, the world eerily quiet. I had too much time to think, to imagine worst-case scenarios, to wonder if I was about to walk into a situation that would make everything worse. The ER waiting room was nearly empty. I approached the desk with as much confidence as I could muster. I'm here to see Elliot Kingsley. I'm his mother, Adrienne Kingsley. The receptionist checked her computer. He's been admitted. 4th floor, room 412. But visiting hours don't start until... I understand. Can you at least tell me his condition? She looked at me for a long moment, taking in my obvious exhaustion, the scarf covering what she probably recognized as radiation treatment effects. He's stable, resting. The doctor will have more information in the morning. Stable, resting. Not dying. Not in immediate danger. I felt my knees go weak with relief. Thank you, I managed. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, even though I knew I couldn't go to his room. I just needed to be close. I needed to be in the same building, on the same floor, breathing the same air. It was irrational and probably pathetic, but I didn't care. The 4th floor waiting area was deserted, except for a young woman asleep in one of the chairs, her dark hair falling across her face. For a moment, I thought it was Kelsey. Then she shifted, and I realized it was someone else entirely. Someone younger, maybe a sister or friend waiting for a patient. I sat down 3 chairs away and stared at the wall. Room 412 was down that hallway, maybe 50 feet away. My son was in there, sleeping or awake or scared or angry or any number of things I'd never know because I couldn't go to him. This was what I'd created with my boundaries and my conditions and my unwillingness to accept abuse. My son sick in a hospital room and me sitting in a waiting room in the middle of the night, separated by legal orders and accumulated hurt and pride on both sides. Mrs. Kingsley? I looked up. A young man stood in front of me, Asian, maybe 30 years old, wearing scrubs. I'm Dr. James Morrison. I'm treating your son. Is he okay? I stood up quickly. What happened? Severe panic attack, likely brought on by prolonged stress and anxiety. We've run cardiac tests and everything looks normal. He's going to be fine physically, emotionally. Dr. Morrison paused. He's been talking about you, about your estrangement. I think he needs to see you, Mrs. Kingsley. I can't force it, but professionally, I believe it would help. His wife isn't here, Dr. Morrison said. She came earlier, stayed for an hour, then left. Said she needed to get back to the baby. He's alone in there. Alone. Just like I'd been alone through surgery and radiation. Just like we'd both been alone for 4 months, separated by stubbornness and manipulation and wounds that kept festering because we refused to let them air. Can I see him? I asked. Room 412. I'll make sure no one stops you. I walked down that hallway on shaking legs, my hand trailing along the wall for support. At his door, I paused, suddenly terrified. What if he rejected me? What if seeing me made him worse? What if Dr. Morrison was wrong and this was a terrible mistake? But I'd come this far. I'd left my house at 3 in the morning while recovering from cancer treatment because my son was hurt. I wasn't turning back now. I knocked softly and pushed open the door. Elliot was awake, staring at the ceiling. He turned his head when I entered, and I saw the exact moment he registered who I was. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Mom? His voice cracked on the word. Hi, baby, I said, and started crying. He started crying too, and suddenly we were both sobbing in that hospital room, 4 months of pain and silence and fear pouring out of us in great heaving waves of grief. I moved to his bedside, and he reached for my hand, and I took it. His fingers were cold. I held them between both my hands, trying to warm them, trying to communicate through touch everything I couldn't say with words. I'm sorry, he whispered. Mom, I'm so sorry. I've been so stupid. I've been so wrong. Shh, I soothed, stroking his hair the way I used to when he was small and scared. We'll talk later. Right now, you just need to rest. No, he insisted, gripping my hand tighter. No, I need to say this now, before I lose my nerve. Before Kelsey comes back, and I let her convince me you're the enemy again. I went very still. Elliot, she's been lying to me, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. About so many things. The jobs she lost, the money she's been spending, the way she talks about you when you're not around. I found text messages on her phone 3 days ago. Messages to her mother about how they just need to wait until you die, so the money will be ours. About how your cancer is actually convenient timing. My breath caught. Elliot, I confronted her. She denied everything at first, then said I was violating her privacy by looking at her phone. We've been fighting for days. And then today at work, I couldn't breathe. My chest hurt so bad I thought I was dying, and all I could think was that I'd wasted 4 months hating you when you were telling me the truth the whole time. He was sobbing again, his whole body shaking with the force of it. I climbed onto the hospital bed beside him, careful of the IV in his arm, and held him the way I'd held him when he was 5 and had nightmares, when he was 14 and his father died, when he was 20 and his first serious girlfriend broke his heart. I've got you, I whispered. I've got you, baby. You're safe now. We stayed like that for a long time, mother and son, broken and healing simultaneously. Outside the window, the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. A new day, maybe, impossibly, a new beginning. Elliot was released from the hospital the next afternoon with prescriptions for anxiety medication and a referral to a therapist. Not Dr. Morrison, the court-appointed family therapist, but someone new, someone who could help him process everything he'd been through without the weight of our legal situation hanging over every session. I drove him to my house, not because he asked, but because when the discharge nurse asked where he'd be staying during recovery, he looked at me with such desperate hope that I couldn't say no. Kelsey's going to be furious, he said quietly as we pulled into my driveway. Let her be furious, I replied. You're an adult. You get to decide where you stay. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. The fear in his eyes told me just how deeply Kelsey's manipulation had worked its way into his psyche. He was terrified of her anger, of her disappointment, of losing her approval. That was going to take more than one hospital breakdown to fix. Jennifer had prepared the guest room, the one that used to be Elliot's childhood bedroom before I redecorated after he moved out. She'd stocked it with everything he might need. Toiletries, comfortable clothes, books, his favorite snacks from when he was a teenager. When he saw it, he started crying again. I don't deserve this, he said. After everything I said, everything I did. You're my son, I interrupted gently. That doesn't come with conditions. It never has. Over the next few days, we talked, really talked, for the first time in years, not the surface conversations we'd been having, the carefully edited exchanges designed to avoid conflict, real, painful, necessary conversations about what had happened and why. He told me about how Kelsey had isolated him slowly, so gradually he hadn't noticed it happening. How she'd reframe every interaction with me as an attack, every gesture as manipulation. How she'd convinced him that setting boundaries with his mother was healthy independence, when really it was cutting off his support system so she could control the narrative completely. She'd cry after every dinner at your house, he explained. Tell me how you looked at her with judgment, how you made her feel small. And I believed her because why would she lie? Why would my wife invent things about my mother? Because she needed me to be the villain, I said. Because as long as I was the problem, you wouldn't look too closely at her behavior. He nodded miserably. I found the credit card statements. $38,000 in charges I didn't know about. Designer clothes, expensive dinners with her mother, a trip to Miami she told me was for work. When I asked about it, she said I was being controlling, that she deserved nice things after growing up poor, that I was turning into you. And that scared you, I said gently, being compared to me. She made you sound like a monster, he whispered, like this cold, manipulative woman who used money as a weapon. And I started seeing everything you did through that lens. When you asked questions about the boutique, I heard you doubting her. When you set boundaries after she spit in your food, I heard you being cruel. I couldn't see what was really happening because she'd already written the story in my head. We talked about the pregnancy, about Emma, about how Kelsey had used the baby as leverage from the moment she found out she was expecting. She knew I'd do anything to protect my daughter, Elliot said. She knew I was terrified of repeating my childhood, of Emma growing up without a father the way I grew up without Dad. So every time I questioned something, she'd say I was choosing my mother over my child. She made it impossible to be a good husband and a good son simultaneously. That's called a false choice, I told him, and it's one of the oldest manipulation tactics there is. On the third day, Kelsey showed up. She rang the doorbell at 7 in the morning, pounding on the door when I didn't answer immediately. When I finally opened it, she pushed past me into the foyer, holding Emma in a car seat. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Where's my husband?" "I'm here." Elliot appeared at the top of the stairs, looking exhausted but steady. "We need to talk, Kelsey." What followed was one of the most excruciating hours of my life. I stayed in the kitchen, giving them privacy in the living room, but I could hear every word. Kelsey crying, pleading, apologizing, promising to change. Then, when that didn't work, attacking, calling him weak, calling him a mama's boy, threatening to take Emma and disappear. "You can't do this to me," she sobbed. "I'm your wife. I had your baby. We're a family." "We're not a family," Elliot said quietly. "We're two people who hurt each other because we don't know how to be honest. I need to figure out who I am without you telling me. And you need to get help, Kelsey. Real help. Not the kind where you tell a therapist what they want to hear. The kind where you actually face why you do the things you do." She left in a fury, taking Emma with her. Elliot stood at the window, watching them drive away, tears streaming down his face. "Did I just lose my daughter?" he asked. "No," I said firmly. "You're her father. You have rights. And Douglas will help you establish a custody arrangement that protects Emma and gives you time with her. But Elliot, you can't go back to how things were. Not for Emma's sake, not for yours." He nodded slowly. "I know. I just wish it didn't hurt so much." "Love usually does," I said, "even when you're doing the right thing." The following weeks were complicated. Kelsey fought the separation viciously, posting on social media about Elliot abandoning his family, about me poisoning him against his wife, about how she was a single mother now because of my interference. The GoFundMe grew to $67,000. But Elliot stood firm. He moved into an apartment, started therapy 3 times a week, and began the process of establishing formal custody arrangements for Emma. Douglas helped navigate the legal complexities, ensuring that Elliot's relationship with his daughter was protected regardless of what happened with the marriage. I finished my radiation treatment. The fatigue gradually lifted, the burns healed, and Dr. Chen declared me cancer-free with excellent prognosis. I'd survived breast cancer and the loss of my son and the worst period of my life, and somehow, impossibly, I'd come through it with my dignity intact. 6 months after that night in the hospital, Elliot and I had dinner at my house, just the two of us, like we used to before Kelsey entered our lives. We cooked together, drank wine, talked about everything and nothing. It felt tentative, fragile, like we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing and shattering this delicate peace we'd built. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," he said as we were cleaning up, "for how I treated you, for believing her over you, for letting you go through cancer alone." "Then don't forgive yourself yet," I said. "Just keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep being honest. Forgiveness will come eventually or it won't. But we're here now, and that's what matters." He hugged me then, a real hug, the kind we hadn't shared in years. "I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry I forgot that for a while." "I never forgot," I whispered into his shoulder, "not even for a moment." A year after everything fell apart, Elliot brought Emma to meet me for the first time. She was 14 months old, starting to walk, babbling in that language that only toddlers understand. She had Elliot's blue eyes and Kelsey's dark hair, and when she smiled at me, I felt something in my chest that had been frozen for so long finally thaw. "Hi, Emma," I said softly, kneeling down to her level. "I'm your grandmother." She reached for me with chubby hands, and I picked her up, this miraculous child who looked like my son, who carried my blood, who represented hope and future and second chances. Elliot stood watching us, tears in his eyes. "I'm getting divorced," he said. "Kelsey won't do the work. She won't admit she needs help. I can't fix her, and I can't let Emma grow up thinking that her mother's behavior is normal or acceptable." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. Because despite everything, I knew divorce meant pain, meant failure, meant a little girl growing up in a broken home. "I'm not," Elliot said. "Not anymore. Emma deserves better than parents who destroy each other. She deserves to see what healthy relationships look like, and I needed to learn that from you." We spent that afternoon playing with Emma, the three of us together in the house that had felt so empty for so long. When they left, I stood at the door watching Elliot buckle his daughter into her car seat, watching him drive away not with the certainty that he'd come back, but with the hope that he would. That night, I sat in my study looking at the framed photo Jennifer had given me. It was from that afternoon, me holding Emma, both of us laughing at something Elliot had said. 3 generations of Kingsleys, broken and healing and learning how to be a family again. I thought about that dinner a year ago, about Kelsey spitting in my food, about the words "execute the plan" that had changed everything. I thought about how close I'd come to losing my son forever, to dying without reconciliation, to accepting abuse because I was too afraid of being alone. And I thought about what I'd learned, that sometimes the hardest, most painful form of love is the kind that sets boundaries. That says, I love you enough to let you go, and I respect myself enough to demand respect in return. That refuses to accept crumbs when you deserve the whole meal. I'd lost almost everything to learn that lesson. My relationship with my son, a year of my life, my peace of mind. I'd faced cancer alone, fought battles I never wanted to fight, stood my ground when every instinct screamed at me to give in. But I'd kept my dignity. I'd kept my self-respect. And ultimately, slowly, painfully, I'd found my way back to my son. Not to the relationship we had before, but to something better. Something built on honesty instead of obligation. On mutual respect instead of guilt and manipulation. The road ahead was still uncertain. Elliot's divorce would be messy. Emma would grow up with complicated family dynamics. Kelsey would likely fight us every step of the way. There would be more pain, more challenges, more moments when I questioned whether any of this was worth it. But standing in my study that night, looking at the photo of 3 generations smiling together, I knew the answer. It was worth it. Every painful moment, every tear, every night alone, every time I chose dignity over comfort, truth over convenience, self-respect over desperate peace. Because I'd taught my son the most important lesson a mother can teach, that love without respect isn't really love at all, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is refusing to let them treat you as less than you are, even when that someone is your own child, even when it costs you everything, even when it breaks your heart to do it, especially then.